Well, Andrew, it's 7 o'clock if you want to go ahead and take it away.
Sounds great. Well, welcome everybody. I think we're supposed to have around 400 and some odd people joining us tonight. So people are jumping in right now. So I'll sort of do a slow intro, and by the time we get to the meat of it, hopefully everyone will be online. I'd like to welcome Charlie Enright tonight, who's going to help us understand a little bit about the starting area and hopefully reduce everyone's or anyone's anxieties about having a start right in front of Fort Adams, which I think will be very exciting and a nice improvement for the race. And then subsequent to that, there'll be time for some questions, and people can use the Q&A button, I think, and ask some questions. Is that right, Kate? And we'll see them and we can answer some of those that aren't answered as we go along. And then we're going to have I'm going to do a quick talk about the wind farms. And then we're going to move on and have Frank give us the first of a couple, I believe, Gulfstream updates as we approach race day. And with that, I'm going to kick it off with Charlie, and it's going to be a little question and answer format. I'm going to throw some questions at Charlie that hopefully he can expand on, and answer the questions before they're even asked by most of you who have them. So, Kate, could you throw up a little bit of the graphic of the starting area? Because I think Charlie's going to probably want to talk to that a little bit. And once we see that on the screen, there we go. I was going to just ask Charlie to give us a little overview of the box, and I can chime in with some of the detail that he might not be so familiar with. He hasn't studied this for months and months like I have. But Charlie, if you would just give us an overview of the new starting area, some of the dimensions at play, if you would, and in general, how the starting area sets up as a comparison to not only where we've raced in the past here at the Bermuda race, but also some of the other races you've done around the world. And by way of introduction, I should also say, those of you who are not aware, Charlie's done a little bit of racing and offshore racing, and has had a lot of experience starting in the South Bay here. So Charlie speaks from a position of experience here, not just with Narragansett Bay, but also with how starts play into a rather longer race. So with that, Charlie, why don't you give us an overview at least of how you see this start in the new start area?
Cool. Well, thanks for having me. Definitely done a lot of offshore sailboat starts, inclusive of the Bermuda race on the old line, even as recently as 22. But I think the idea behind the new location is to make it a little bit more fan friendly, and to bring the public to the start line at Fort Adams, which I think is great. But it does make for a slightly more complicated exit, but one I think that we should embrace, certainly. If the Bermuda race, the Bermuda race is undisputably one of the great 600-mile races that exist throughout the globe. And if you look at a bunch of the other ones, the Sydney Hobart, the Fastnet, the Middle Sea race, I mean, they all start in locations that are much more complicated than this. So I think there's a bunch of things to think about when you leave the dock in the morning, kind of where you want to do your prep. And just looking at it, I think most of that will probably be up in the bay. I don't think it's a bad idea to make sure you got everything squared away there, and maybe kind of tuck in behind the behind Clinkstone over on the Jamestown shore, and kind of wait your turn for your start to come. But in theory, it should all kind of be the same in terms of the length of the line, the number of boats on the line, and when you start. There could be a little bit more maneuvering depending upon the wind direction and what kind of boat you're sailing, for sure. So I think kind of wrapping your head around that is going to be a big part of your pre-start game plan. But Frank will talk a little bit more about your race game plan later, but I think it's also important to point out that the start is important for sure, and it's good for taking pictures, but it is a very small part of a 600-mile race. So I think being conservative is a really good idea, and you can't win the race at the start, but you can definitely lose it, as the old adage says. You definitely want to be the person that didn't have a good start, but won into Bermuda versus the person that was talking about how good a start they had, but ended up 10th in class or something like that. So you got to do the big things right. The start is just part of it. So, it's a good time to be conservative. And, as far as approaching the line, I think you guys know this probably better than I, because I'm currently not doing the race. So I haven't read the documentation as closely as you have, but if you are over, you can't go back. And I believe it's a 30-minute penalty, which is not insignificant. So anyway, I think they changed the starting time so that everyone's kind of starting on the same tide. The line should be similar in length to what it was before, potentially not totally square to the wind, but that presents, opportunity. And I think that it's going to be a pretty cool thing for everybody on the shore to see and kind of take part of.
That's great. Couple questions that I have, and it deals with the tide issue. Normally we would start at around 1 o'clock with actually warning gun at 1 o'clock and the first start at 10 after 1 in the afternoon. Turns out there's a tide shift just at 1:10, actually 1:12. So we've pushed the first start back by an hour. So everyone's going to be starting on an incoming tide. And if tide were your only consideration, Charlie, where would you be on the starting line?
On an incoming tide, there's more water running into the bay in the middle, certainly, like an hour after the switch, depending upon what's been going on from a meteo standpoint. The tide could be changed everywhere on the line. I think everybody on the call is aware that it changes first inshore. So maybe an hour later for some of the first starts, depending upon what's going on with runoff and what's coming out of the river and whatnot. There could actually be a little outbound push still in the middle of the bay. So that's something to keep an eye on. While you're preparing up in the bay, there'll be plenty of lobster traps and stuff like that to get a good beat on what the current's actually doing. But in theory, it should be switched for everybody. So a little bit of relief on the shore, but I think you're really trying to use the current to time your approach to the line and make sure it's helping you be conservative, which I think is good. And but I think it's more about minimizing the maneuvers and getting off clean than it is really talking about the overall strategy at this stage of the game.
Right. And I guess the point to highlight there is if we were buoy racing, we probably all are just short tacking up the shore. But there's not much running room if you start at the pin and you're heading towards shore and in a classic southwesterly. So, and I think your point's well taken that really it's about minimizing maneuvers, especially because we're set up for some offshore work, not necessarily buoy work in terms of crew and configuration. So trying to take the best advantage of a little relief at shore might not be your primary focus. Is that right?
Yeah, for sure. And I think it can get pretty complicated, inshore with the continuing obstruction and room to tack and whatnot. So I think if you find yourself in those situations, which is probably very likely in a southwesterly, which is not to be a worry, but just to be managed. I think a lot of communication early on, boat to boat in these scenarios really helps. I think, calling for room to tack, boats acknowledging that, saying you tack or tacking immediately. Those are some of the only words that are actually in the rule book that you're kind of required to use. But I think the big thing is there's a couple marks in here, and you can kind of see the dumpling marks over by Jamestown, and you can see, I don't know if you can see it in there, but there's Kettle Bottom just south of Jamestown there where it juts out. You want to be kind of thinking about these big key points if you're in a southwesterly and whether or not you can lay them as to how many maneuvers you're going to end up doing getting out of the bay. I think, immediately about the dumpling. I think about Kettle Bottom. I think about R6 right off of Castle Hill. But you want to be thinking about those when you're kind of planning your exit and trying to minimize the maneuvers as best you can while positioning yourself well relative to the fleet and also kind of taking into consideration the current. And, I think the current's obviously a bigger factor if there's less wind. and just kind of managing all of those things as you kind of create your pre-start game plan. And you can kind of do the armchair quarterback thing, and you can look at the tide and look at the weather and decide what you think you're going to do, and then well in advance, and then adjust it as you get out there and see the current conditions on the water.
That's great. You mentioned that we're likely to see similar number of boats on the starting line, and I think that by and large that's true. Although I do want to alert everybody that the likelihood is it might be a few more boats on the line than you're used to in the past. We're likely to be compressing the number of starts down from, it was 17 starts in the 2022 cycle. We did have 193 boats or something like that starting. So it was maybe 15, 20 more boats than we have right now or expect to have. We're going to have between 10 and 12 starts probably this cycle. So we are going to be combining a couple of classes to, compress our starting sequence to under 2 hours total, which means you might be seeing more boats on the line that you've seen in the past. Average, starting line size last year was, or starting class size was somewhere around 12. I think the largest was, we had a couple starts of 15. We might be having starts of 20 to 25, but I think most of them will still be in the, under 20 range. So you could see a couple more boats on the line than you're used to in the past as we do try to compress things a little bit. And I think it might be worthwhile taking a moment to expand a little bit, Charlie, if you could, on that issue of room to tack and that rule about a continuing obstruction and what happens, you're approaching the shore on a starboard tack and you need to be tacking back out into the fleet. Yeah, explain a little bit more about that, because I think while some of us might be familiar with some of these boat-to-boat tactics and sort of buoy racing situations, many of our competitors are, they race offshore and they like the start that happened out in the ocean where you don't have much to worry about except finding Bermuda on the other end. So if you could explain a little bit about that continuing obstruction rule, that would be great.
Yeah. In our last Bermuda start in 22, we only had 3 boats and we were the only monohull, if you could even call it that. It's more like a monomoran, but it made for a nice wide starting line, which we were very thankful for, with only just a couple people on board. But the room to tack at a continuing obstruction is the leewardmost boat in a starboard tack situation coming off the line on in a traditional southwesterly would go until they can no longer go because of depth, and at that point they would hail for room to tack, and the boat that is keeping them from tacking can then either say you tack or turn immediately. If, depending upon the breeze direction, there's another boat on that boat's weather hip, then the call gets passed down the line. So better to do it early and to be conservative and to have the whole fleet go together.
Got it. So everyone tacks out, and of course at that point, supposedly everyone's on port until someone decides to go back, right? And so there could be a little bit of a ping pong effect over time as boats try to get out, get out of the bay there. So I guess it could be a, rapid tacking scenario. So back to your earlier point about minimizing maneuvers, being on that shore may not be the most comfortable place to be unless you're comfortable with some quick maneuvers.
Yeah, and then it's just like a fleet race. Then the boats end up on port tack, and the new obstruction is a boat on starboard tack, and the room to tack game kind of starts again. So it's kind of trying to look forward, play out the situation, and make sure you're communicating amongst your competitors. Yeah.
How does how would some of the boats are quick maneuvering boats? Some boats are larger, heavier 60-footers with a Finisterre crew of 4 and electric winches. How does the equipment you're driving play into your tactics if you were advising skippers?
Well, I think if you're calling for room to tack, it's the room that you are required to take to tack your particular type of vessel. So it's not about depth entirely. It's about the time that it takes you to safely maneuver the boat when you're hailing for and giving room to tack. So that definitely comes into play.
Yeah.
But if you're a couple seconds late for the start and it avoids maneuvers and chaos, that's certainly better than getting yourselves involved in a situation that you can't get out of. So again, I can't stress enough that it's where you are 10 minutes after the start that matters most. It's not necessarily where you are at the gun when you got 600 miles to go.
That's great. Yep. Really good advice. Couple quick things I'd like to point out just on the chart while Kate has it up. You'll see a line drawn between, I believe that's R11 and R9, G11 and G9 over there on the western side. Competitors are excluded from that space. So don't go beyond that line between those buoys. So it's not just about those as marks of the course, but it's that you can't go inside that line. And the reason is we're expecting that there's going to be a lot of recreational traffic that has to ooch through there. If you look at that line, we're taking up about 1,750 feet of it. Then there's that little green section, which is going to be a press box with a couple of media boats going back and forth in it. From there over, in terms of navigable water, is the sum total of what the recreational traffic has to go in and out of the bay. And so there's going to be a lot of boats, especially shallower draft boats, that are going to be on the other side of that red line. And we really just don't want to encourage our competitors to get in there and tangled up with likely a lot of recreational traffic. Conveniently, the Newport Bermuda race does have the benefit of a federal regulation that actually shuts down commercial traffic in the bay on the Friday for the Bermuda race. So there's actually a federal law that says there shall be no pilotage in and out of Narragansett Bay during the afternoon of Friday of our race. So we do not have to worry about any large shipping. It's really just recreational traffic and maybe a fishing boat coming in or out of Newport, but we'll do our best to make sure we've communicated to all the local marinas, all the local fishing fleets, that maybe between 2 and 4 in the afternoon on Friday is not the best time to be trying to get in or out. But we will have a lot of spectator traffic out there, so you can expect that. Another thing to be aware of is that the shore along Fort Adams, we're going to try to keep very clear of all spectator vessels. Kate, you might go back to the other more zoomed out slide. There you go. You can see there's a couple little red circles there. That's no spectator passage, and we're going to have a number of course marshals out there trying to keep spectator boats away from that shore, so that boats that are tacking up the shore are not having to tangle with a lot of recreational traffic that are coming in for close pictures. Again, there might be a media boat in there taking pictures, but they'll be very experienced and will not provide an obstacle for you guys. What other things to point out about this? I think that's about it at the moment, unless there's some questions, and I'll go over, unless you have anything you want to throw in right now, Charlie. There's a couple questions popping up in the Q&A, and I'll throw those at you.
Now, if you got a northerly and you're sailing a, nice cruisy symmetrical boat, maybe you can just square back and get out of there without doing a maneuver at all. So, you never know.
Yeah, that's great. Though that's another interesting thing to think about, is what happens if we do have a northerly. Yeah, it could be really clean or could be very exciting. It will certainly be very colorful. We have northerly.
Yeah.
A question about start times. We are starting at, obviously not considering the possibility of a postponement, but the scheduled starts will be starting at 2:10 with a warning gun at 2 o'clock, 1400. And we're going to start fastest boats first. The idea there is if we do have sort of a light southwesterly on a flooding tide, we don't really want to start slower classes and then have them being overtaken by faster classes up against the shore as boats are trying, maybe going 2 or 3 knots trying to get out of the bay. So we're going to start fast classes first so you don't have a pile up. So depending upon where you typically are in terms of speeds, you can sort of figure out whether you're going to be in the front or the back, but all that'll come out in the 2 days before the race. We'll start publishing scratch sheets and class breaks, and so you'll start understanding where you're going to fall. But fastest boats first. So the 2 Gibbs Hill classes will probably start, or at least the fastest Gibbs Hill class will probably start first, and then perhaps both of them to get both the Gibbs Hill classes, and then into the St. David's classes. We have 1 fast boat, Pyewacket, that'll probably start in open along with Arabella. So they two very different boats, but they only two of them, they might get off early. But it's generally speaking going to be fastest boats first, followed by the slower end of the fleet. Another question, Constellation Rock near the south shore of Fort Adams, near the shore just south of Fort Adams. Not familiar with that. I don't know that we have a blow up that actually names that rock. So I don't know what to comment on it. The line, there's a 4-footer rock. If you look, again, it's this chart doesn't show it because the little red circle, sort of no spectator passage circle right up just north of Fort Adams is sitting on top of it. But there's a 4-foot rock there. It should not play a role after the start, but you should be aware that there is some shallow water over there. The pin is expected to be in around 40 to 50 feet of water, so you'll be fine if you're maneuvering near the line. But as you know, you don't want to get too close to shore over there. For the double-handed classes, will there be consideration given so that there are fewer boats starting at the same time than fully crewed boats? It's a good question. We'll have to see how that all shapes up. Right now, double-handeds seem to be around 16 or 17 boats entered. That to me seems like a perfect single class. And I don't know who we would add to your class to start. So I think it's very likely that you'll start as a single class. But again, all of these will be decided really after on-site registration when we know exactly how many boats we're dealing with. When will SIs be released? Typically 2 weeks before the race day. So you can expect it sometime in that first week of June. At the end of the first week in June is the expectation. Is that red line considered to be a continuing obstruction? That's an interesting question for Charlie. Charlie, someone's asking whether or not that line labeled as competitors excluded is considered to be a continuing obstruction. And I think it would be, right?
I think it would be my initial impression without looking into the, exact verbiage of the race documentation. But if you just have to honor those 2 marks and you can go between them and shore, then no, the obstruction becomes the land. But if it's a proper exclusion zone, then yes.
Got it. Yep. The expectation is it'll be set up in the SIs and clearly delineated as a line that is an exclusion line.
Then it might as well be viewed as a brick wall.
Right. Exactly. Can we sail through the spectator area purple? Yes, indeed you can. That recommended spectator area is just an encouragement to those who are out on their boats. And by the way, we hope most people are showing up at Fort Adams to watch as opposed to being out on their boats, but we know there certainly will be a lot of people out on their boats. We're hoping that they stay over there away from the Castle Hill shore, but you are welcome to race over there and they will all get out of your way. It should be much less congested over there than it is, closer to the starting line. But yes, there's no exclusion over there. And that's it for the questions that have been posted so far. Charlie, anything else you want to throw out here before we move on to some further offshore stuff?
No, not that I can think of really. Like I said, don't go out there without a plan, but don't be afraid to modify your plan based on what you see and how it's all playing out. And I just urge you to be conservative, which I know is difficult when the competitive juices start flowing, but you got to remember it's a marathon, not a sprint. And you don't want to get any crazy penalties or kind of take yourself out in the early running. So just kind of wish everybody a great race and be exciting to see how it all plays out here.
That's great. Charlie, thanks so much for spending your time with us and explaining some of these things. And by the way, I understand you're not racing this race, at least not yet. Is there like an auction site for?
No. And if I'm in town and it works out, I'd love to watch the start from Sail Newport. But there's a chance I might not be around. So,
well, we hope that if you're around, you join us at the fort and enjoy the start and maybe snuggle into the booth with some of our commentators and give us some colorful commentary.
All right. Sounds good.
Thank you.
Thanks for
And
having me.
if you're willing to hang around for a little while in case other questions come up later on, I'll throw them back at you. But if you got to go, totally understand it. But we thank you for the time you did spend with us.
Cool. Thank you, guys. Take care.
Kate, would you mind pulling up the offshore chart or the chart from just offshore with the wind farms on it? Before we move over to Frank, I just wanted to take a moment to talk about something a little further offshore than just the starting line. And that's the Ørsted wind farms that have materialized since we all raced through this area in 2022. When we raced through here in 2022, there were no wind farms out here, not a single one. So it felt like just open ocean. And as of now, if you look at the rhumb line, which is the black line, the rhumb line's going right through one large wind farm and right next to another smaller wind farm. The smaller one is built. So those wind turbines all exist right now. That's called South Fork Wind. And those are on current charts. So if you go and update your chart kit right now, or go and buy a paper chart, a new one, you should see on that chart those marks that, those waypoints that are there with little yellow lights on them. If you don't see that on your chart, that means you do not have current charts. And I encourage you to go get updated charts, because those things will leave a mark if you hit one. So let's be really careful and make sure we have charts updated. The larger circle is Revolution Wind, and that's under construction right now. The rhumb line goes right through that. Some of those are on updated charts and some are not. And the CMAP charts that I just updated my kit to do not have any of the Revolution Wind marks on there. So what do you do about that if you can't find a chart that's appropriate for your equipment that has these? Well, Ørsted website, and Ørsted's the development company that's building these, has a really nice website for downloading GPX files for any of their projects. And so you can download a GPX file of all the waypoints of all of the locations where wind turbines are expected to be, or where they're constructing them now, or will construct them. So I encourage you to go to the Ørsted website, and Kate, I'm hoping you can post that in the chat somewhere. It was also included in a newsletter that we sent out, a competitor bulletin, the links to the Ørsted site where you can download these GPX files in many different, or not just GPX files, all sorts of waypoint files from many different formats of plotters, so that you can get these on your equipment and know where they are. It's very likely that it's likely that you're going to need these coming or going. There's a comment from someone saying Revolution Wind Farm has not started construction yet. Partially true. I don't know that they've had any pylons in the water, but they've got a lot of construction equipment out there, moving boulders and starting to lay cable lines for that construction. And we're in contact with Revolution, with Ørsted on a regular basis. And we haven't decided yet whether we're going to put an exclusion zone in that keeps us away from their construction equipment, because they don't know exactly where it's going to be. But at this point, it's just important that we think you should have all this stuff plotted so you know where their equipment is, their fixed equipment's likely to be. And then as we get closer to the race, we'll know where the moving stuff, all their construction vessels are going to be. And that's somewhat important because apparently the construction vessels have safety zones around them that are Coast Guard safety zones of, I believe, 500 yards. So you can't get within 500 yards of one of these construction vessels. And at night, in the dark, in fog, we might not know. So there may be reasons for us to have to move away from their construction. They also potentially might be building in an area, hopefully because we encourage them to do so, that's away from our rhumb line. So more to report on that, but you're strongly encouraged to go and make sure you have current charts and that you get the waypoint files for the under construction or planned construction turbines.
Andrew.
Yes.
I think one thing I noticed yesterday, I just happened to check on up-to-date charts, that everything showed fine on the vector charts, but didn't show on the raster charts. So that's another little hint. Some of the raster charts are not being updated by NOAA. And
Yep,
so the
that
vector
could-
charts have the wind farm, but the vector didn't. I'm sorry, the raster didn't.
Yep, well, that's good to know. Thanks for that. All right, with that, Frank, I think it's time to talk about the further offshore stuff, which is the Gulf Stream. Frank Bohlen, thanks for joining us. You are our perennial expert and guide on all things Gulf Stream, and we're looking forward to hearing what you have to say about this year's Gulf Stream and how it's setting up.
Well, hoping for the best.
Yep, Frank, we see it. You can go ahead and start your slideshow.
Okay. I don't see it going from the beginning here, so I'm just giving it a little.
Yep.
Right there. There you go.
Well, there's a lot of uncertainty in everything you've been hearing and probably hear and try and learn, but one thing for sure, there will be a Gulf Stream despite what you've read in the newspapers on some occasions, and weather. And what I'm going to try to do here is to give you an idea of some of the resources that you ought to be looking at when it comes to preparation for the race. And if you don't take anything else away, from my talk, you want to take away the need for the value of preparation, the importance of preparation. It's been said that races are lost on the water, and we could spend a lot of time talking about what preparation means in terms of boat and crew and the rest. I'm going to limit my comments only to Gulf Stream and weather. Now, your race committee is going to be providing a variety of information to you over the next couple of months. And we're going to start with our Gulf Stream tutorials that we've seen before in May. And they'll come out about every 2 weeks or so to try to give you an idea of what's going on with the stream. There'll be a skippers meeting on the 20th. I believe will be virtual. In past years, it's been up to the Jenny Pickens, but I think this year it's going to be virtual. So more people can be in attendance than two from each boat. Then during the race, there'll be twice daily weather forecasts coming from commanders, one in the morning and one in the afternoon. Coming down through your communication link, probably emails. When we get down to Bermuda, there'll be briefings for the return trip and produced by Bermuda Weather. That'll start on the 27th, on Thursday, the 27th at RBYC. For those of you that have seen them in the past, they'll be about the same format. It'll be a very, very nice personal interaction with Bermuda Weather. We'll also have some Gulf Stream charts that'll be posted up as part of that briefing, courtesy of Jen Clark. And then we'll have a weather and Gulf Stream presentation for participants in the double-handed return race, probably on the 29th. I haven't heard a final date on that one yet. I want to call your attention to the fact that there will be a navigators forum Thursday afternoon, right after that briefing, and encourage you to participate in it. It's a great session, if I do say so myself. It's a good chance for a bunch of navigators together and grouse about everything from the race committee. They're always worthy of some grousing, some amount of grousing, and communications and different tactics for different boats. Over the years, it's proven to be a very interesting time. I'm off the air here. I just stopped advancing.
Just click back on the slides. That probably will help.
Let me click on this. There we go. Try that. Call your attention to the fact on the race on the race website down in the corner there, bermudarace.com. There's a variety of resources for your review. Continuing, that's where the Gulf Stream notes will be posted. That's where the history of the Gulf Stream notes, for those who'd like to look back at the history of the race, they'll be there. In addition, there'll be a series of links. We'll try to keep these up to date. This is a work in progress. You realize that for those of you that played with links over the years, it's gotten to be in the last year or so a little infuriating how often the links don't work. And how on this list, for example, you have down here, the Weather Service guys are working fine. Hope you can see my cursor. But the Navy Research Lab is currently off the air. So next week we'll revise this listing and remove that link. It isn't critical. It gives you another view of the HICOM model, but that's the same model that's being used by NOAA, and we have a hand on that. There are also a couple of write-ups. One is the Gulfstream primer, which has been updated. I'll talk about some of that in a minute, as well as an article that was in the Race Bulletin, the Gulfstream analysis. Commend your attention to both of those. Let's start with the Gulfstream. Classic Western boundary current, the Gulfstream. Serves to separate the colder waters of the continental shelf from the warmer waters of the Sargasso Sea. It's primarily a wind-driven current regime. That's why they have this lovely semicircular elliptical pattern. You know that if you sailed around in it for a while, it's got sometimes a few more kinks and twirls than a nice elliptical pattern, but it's generally elliptical, driven by the prevailing winds, Remember, it is wind-driven to some extent, and the coupling, the rule of thumb coupling between wind and currents is that it's about a 3% coupling, meaning a 30-knot wind will give you about a knot of current. Call me a liar, 9/10. So if you happen to have a 30-knot southwesterly blowing over the stream, the currents may be slightly higher than usual. Conversely, if you have a 30-knot northeasterly blowing against it, it can stymie some of the Gulfstream current, but it can also cause a significant increase in sea state. In addition to winds, temperature and salinity affecting the water column density are also a factor, and temperature represents probably the best way to know where you are in the stream. And this picture gives you an idea of what the profile looks like. We took it in February across 36 North from North Carolina roughly to Spain. And you can get a very nice picture up there. It shows you the main body of the stream where temperatures are running from something like 16 centigrade across 24 centigrade to 18 to 22 centigrade. It's about a 60-mile width, a typical width of the main body of the stream. Take along a thermometer. Brooks and Gatehouse is fine, but on occasion, the electronic guys have been known to give you some problems. Liquid and glass works just fine. Take along a thermometer. Characteristic stream form. You got a main body of the stream running along here. If you can follow my cursor, I hope. And then a few meanders. Okay, they're called out, meanders. And you have some number of shed features, if you will, rings. In this case, a warm core ring, but we can also get rings in the interior, cold core rings. Classic main body current structure looks like this. You'll come into the edge of the stream. Currents are weak, not much in the way of tidal current along the edge of the shelf, but you start running into some warmer water and the current starts increasing. 50 centimeters a second is a knot. So in short order, you're up to about 50 centimeters a second, but the current speeds keep increasing up to a maximum of 250 centimeters a second, or about 5 knots. And this is remarkably constant, the max in the stream. We don't see many 7-knot currents except down maybe in the Florida Straits. You're on the order of 5 knots or so. The other thing to take a look at is the position of this maxima. It's on the order of 30 nautical miles in from the edge where the temperature started to increase. And number one, and number two, that you tend to have highs and lows, peaks, so that the flow is filamentous. It's not a steady flow. And that's important because if you come into this, sometimes you won't find that 5 knot, but you'll be finding 2 to 3 knots. Here's 150 centimeters a second, 50 times 3 knots down in here. You might want to be satisfied with 3 knots. Remember, the game is to get to Bermuda, not to find the 5-knot core. In fairly short order, about 60 nautical miles, the currents are back down to pre-stream conditions. with some indication on some occasions of a current that's actually running counter to the stream flow, to the west as opposed to the northeast. So don't shoot the navigator if you're getting pushed back on this. That's main body flow, but we also have a series of features, as I said, the meander and something about our rings. Okay, let's talk about the meander to start with. It says right here, it migrates at 10 to 20 nautical miles a day. It's written down, it's in black and white, it must be the law. Well, truth be told, the last few years, we've been seeing a lot of conditions that are counter to that. So here is a meander now, an extreme meander in 2015, just for an example, coming down like this, and you might expect it to be marching off to the northeast. When you come back and take a look at it, that was March, this is now May, and you can see the whole thing sort of backed up on it. Moral of the story here is you've got to keep an eye on what's going on with the meanders. You can't assume that they're going to be simply marching off to the northeast. Same thing goes for the rings. Two different kinds, as I said, to the north, warm core. Notice the diameter, 150 to 300 kilometers. 300 kilometers. That's 180 miles. That's a big patch of water that may have it up to 3 knots of current. Same kind of structure you saw in the main body with maxima about a third of the way into the ring. These guys will drift off, these guys will drift off to the west towards Hatteras. Same thing goes for the cold core. Cold core is rotating counterclockwise, warm core clockwise. Maximum currents in both about 3 knots, as I said. These guys, both the warm and cold tend to drift towards Hatteras at about 1/10 of a knot, fairly slow. But the warm core, because it starts running into shallow water, breaks up in about a month, whereas the cold core may hang around for a long time. The cold core rings are generally the nemesis of the navigator, because very often you can't see them in satellite imagery because they'll sink down just a little bit, and the satellite imagery taking the temperatures, you may have a little bit of warm water just slicking over the top of that cold ring. So you really have to pay attention to these guys. They hang around a long time, and they can affect your strategies. This is a warm core ring now. Just give you an example of what it looks like. One of these is heading up towards, this one is still in contact with the stream. So it might be moving to the west, towards the east, whereas this guy's free and it might be drifting towards the west. This guy here might be getting into the Gulf of Maine, and it's one reason why the Gulf of Maine is warming up so fast. In general, these guys, you could believe it, you were coming down from Newport or so, coming down across this, you may have to worry about this guy a little bit, rotating clockwise. Generally, we don't have too much trouble with warm core rings. We can generally avoid them or use them to our advantage. Okay, you take a look at that, there's plenty of variability in the whole system, and it really requires starting study early, using a variety of resources, and we'll go into those in a moment, with full consideration of the scales of variability, that 180-mile ring. What about the meander structure? What does it mean to us in our track down to Bermuda? The accuracy that you need to figure out something like sea state and what that might mean in terms of risk, what that might mean in terms of strategy. If you're sailing down with a fully manned crew, it's one thing. If you're going down with your wife and kids, it might be another. Your risk susceptibility, your risk acceptance, different circumstances. Reception limitations. Do not, parenthetical, I'm not talking about communications here, but don't take communications as a given. Just because you have a phone in your hand doesn't mean it's going to work or that you can use it. Check that out well before the race, lots of time. And then sensory overload. There's so bloody much information out there on all of these factors today. If you Google up Gulfstream, you'll get 1,000 hits. You want to pick the sites that are the sources of information that are best for your use. They might very well differ from mine. We have different tastes in our drinks and in our wine in particular, for example. Same thing goes for the links. there's so much out there. You got to be sensitive to the fact that you really want to go out and only use 1 or 2 or 3 sites. Otherwise, you're going to spend all your time out there and you can really get yourself sick over it. Let's just start real quick through this. This is an image, an IR image, water temperature image in March. And it gives you an idea. If you look right now at this site, this is Rutgers. If you look right now at this site, you see that there's a lot of cloud. That's what that white is all about. Lots of cloud. You can also see that the quality of these images have been degraded to some extent. That's a long story, longer than we have time for tonight. But it gives you an idea. You begin to work with the best satellite imagery, direct imagery that you can get your hands on. And you're going to use that to compare it to models. This is a particularly good site. This is a 4-day composite produced by the Ocean Prediction Center. All the links are down the bottom. And it allows you to take a look at how things are developing on the stream over a period of time. See if I can do this and see. I got another box hiding my view of it here. For example, pick that here. That was the 10th. There's the 12th. There's the 14th. There's the 15th. And I would keep going, but the site went offline. But it's back online now. You want to get an idea of how things change, a sense of how we've got a 3 or 4 or 5 day race we're looking forward to. If nothing is changing in 4 or 5 days, you only need 1 image before the race. But if you're really planning on playing that meander, that limb that's going to the southeast there, just to the east of the rum line, right in here, you want to make sure it's there if you're doing some gambling with it. Of course, all this depends on what the wind is doing. Okay. Models. Everybody's using models today. For those of you that know me, know that I really like this altimetry-based model of circulation. And I like it for a variety of reasons. It's proven over the past 10 years at least to be pretty accurate. It also provides some detail, not only on the main body of the stream that's running right across. You can see at the moment, this was the 20th, that the main body of the stream was crossing the run line nearly perpendicular. Okay, so you got a nice view of what the main body looks like, but it's also providing a fair amount of detail in the interior. Here's a cold core ring. Shouldn't be too much trouble to us because we're expecting it to be drifting to the west. Okay, but in addition, you can get detail on the flow characteristic right down to Bermuda. Here's Bermuda. And this is the only model that really provides that kind of visual evidence of what the stream looks like down there. This is all part of the Gulf Stream flow. This is one of my favorite models. Now, this is, I call it Mercator. Some people have been known to produce it as Mercator or something like, or Mercator, produced by the Copernicus group in Europe. Got a particularly nice thing when you take a look at the currents. They have, in both cases, the temperature and the currents, they have an animation option. So you can really look at this guy changing with time. And they'll run it out for 10, 12 days. Very valuable tool. Here I've loaded a couple of the models into the Expedition to give you an idea of some of the difference. This is the real-time ocean forecast system to the left. You can see it differs to some extent from the Mercator model. And it differs in terms of the position of the north wall, a little bit further to the north in the Mercator model. So you're well advised to do comparisons between the two, depending on which one you're going to be using or which one you're able to get out there. It makes a difference, can make a difference. Let's run on to the weather real quick. This is probably the most important item that you have, that the navigator has, that the skipper has, to have a knowledge of. And I'm saying that independent of whether you have consultants or not working, you're a better client if you understand something about the weather. And you can ask questions that are more rational and a little more probing if you know something. So pre-race study is essential in my mind here. You can go back. For those of you that like to go back, there's a link to the archived charts. This is just a snap of the start that we had in 22. And for those of you that were there, you'll remember the fun we had with that cold front coming down. That guy that's shown coming down over Newport is a cold front right here, with something of a either stalled or a little bit of there's an intrusion of a warm guy, and there's a couple of troughs here. It was a real quote mess. And it was much more challenging in terms of sailing relative to what the forecasts were because of that structure. So an understanding of some of those features and why they might differ substantially from the forecast is important to you. I start out in all cases, I want to remind you that you should not limit your view to the surface. 500 millibar, what's going on at 18,000 feet, governs what's going on at the surface. You want to pay particular attention to the position of the 5640 contour. That's the dark blue guy here. 564 means 5,640 meters, about 18,000 feet up there. And that is thought to be the southern limit of the storm tracks. And to the south, you tend to get into the tropical conditions. And last summer, we had a long time with that 5640 line way up north. And as a result, the summer sailing conditions were very tropical. Remember that you're going to be you can deal with a variety of weather models. I advise living with one for a while to gain some confidence in what it can do and what it can't do for you. GFS and Euro, this is a predict wind slide that gives you an idea of all the models that are sitting around. Again, too much to talk about, but the moral of the story here is pick one, look out the window, compare what's going on to what's produced by the model, and you'll gain some confidence in the model. And you'll know better that it doesn't really handle rain well, but it handles your southwesterly just fine. Pick an end. Okay. You can do comparisons and predict wind between the two. Here's the high resolution rapid refresh model, which is the best high resolution model, and it's going to be used as part of the forecast scheme that's going to be used for the time correction factors prior to the race. But it only runs out to 30 hours, and it only runs out to about 250 miles. So it's got some limited use, but here now you can compare the results of the HRRR to the GFS or to the Euro model. Very valuable exercise, part of preparation. It's important to remember in all of this that as you get down to the stream, the Gulf Stream with its high water temperature often serves as a weather breeder. Sometimes the conditions are not well forecast because you don't have a lot of observational buoys out there. It's not like what you have terrestrial. We have lots of observational stations. Okay, what we're seeing out there is not particularly well forecast. You know yourself, as you come down towards the stream, you tend to see a street of clouds. That's that rising warm air. And the rising warm air in the presence of a decreasing temperature with elevation often leads to clouds and may lead to rain and may lead to thunderstorms. And they can sometimes come without too much of a warning. So you got to remember that it can be a weather breeder. This is the classic case. We ran into it coming home in one of the races, after one of the races, where you have cold air coming off the landmass to our nice warm Narragansett seawater. You got a characteristic low sitting out over the water. You got a cold air outbreak feeding down there, and it can produce some very interesting and exciting conditions. The lightning storm that we witnessed was equal to anything I've seen in the Midwest. It's can be a very dynamic regime. That's important to remember that if you're looking at the forecast, you can, it's well from the standpoint of adverse or removing any susceptibility to risk, to be a little bit skeptical about the forecast. This is a classic example of that cold front coming down across the stream. There's Bermuda. There's Bermuda in the ring here, and you can get an idea of a strong southwesterlies to the south of it and west to northwest to the north of it. And this is rapidly intensifying, developing hurricane force winds. It should be pretty clear where you don't want to be. So the moral of the story throughout all this is it's not too early to start looking at Gulf Stream and weather conditions right now. Don't rely on your consultants. That's not to say you shouldn't involve one, but you should be ready to ask them some piercing questions from an understanding. Preparation is everything. The old line about prior planning prevents poor performance. There was a few other P's in there, but we'll leave them out for the moment. Prior planning is important. Preparation, I think, is everything. Thanks very much.
Frank, thank you very much for that really insightful presentation. It's good even here in April to start thinking about this stuff. So thanks for getting us grinding away on this. Couple of questions have popped up in the Q&A, and I'll throw them at you if you wouldn't mind.
Sure.
Ignoring meanders, what's the average estimated distance of the northernmost edge of the Gulf Stream? I think meaning from Newport is the question. How far are we sailing before we typically hit the northern wall of the Gulf Stream?
On the order of 200 miles, but that's sort of typical. You might take a look here, and you see that. So here we're 41 to start out, and you're 37 or so. So 37, 30, maybe 39. Sorry, 38. 38 is 3 times 60 is 180 miles. So it's on the order of 200 miles to the edge of the stream.
Got it. Thank you. We noticed that you put up 2 models when you were talking about currents, and neither of those was the RTOFs model.
Yes, it was.
What's your opinion on the RTOFs model in comparison to the others?
Actually, RTOFs was there.
Oh, was it?
Here. This is RTOFs right here.
I see. Okay.
On the right-hand side.
Do you
See-
find one more reliable than the other, or how, and how would you know besides being there?
Well, we get back into this personal taste and personal confidence. I think if you live with the Mercator and you're comparing it to my bias, I really like that altimetry-based model. So I look at how a lot of these models compare to the altimetry-based model, and when I do that, the Mercator model very often comes out best. But now, the other thing, I guess, one of the things to remember is that you got to remember to sail your boat. And very often, for all of the messing about with one model better than the other model, meaning I'm going to go a few miles here, a few miles there, if you put as much time into improving your helming, you'd probably get there faster. Don't put these are really, the comparisons are very, very close. I can show you a set of data. I wish I had the camera here so easily, but I could show you a set of data where they compared direct measurements to the models. And they use gliders to get the data. And there is a set of data that shows the models, one laying right up over the other, and the observed measurements. And I can show you another set of another instance where they're spread to hell. And so it's really a matter of taste in this. I like the Mercator model. I think the real-time ocean forecast system is pretty good, and I think we're going to be using it in the forecast time correction factor analysis. That's fine. Pick one and live with it. You know what it tends to be a little bit rich here, a little poor there. It's just like the weather forecast.
Great, great. And you just answered the last question that was posted, which is how will the current be accounted for in the new race scoring process? And you answered that where the time correction factor scoring model is going to use the RTOFs model for currents. So that's the simple answer for that. And like you said, we just picked one, and that's one we're using. So if you find that another model is better, well, then you're going to outperform the forecast. Great. What time are the model updates going to be available? Well, Frank can talk to that because you probably know the schedule for when these models are all released. I think the question might have been, when are the FTCF ratings going to be released? I can answer that in case that was the question. They're going to be released the morning of the race. Exactly when, not clear right now, but probably
Right.
between 7 and 10 a.m. you could expect to get an email from the race committee with all the time correction factors. As to when the models update, Frank, you want to handle that?
They're generally once a day, and it's depending on who you're working with, it may be midnight or 6 in the morning. But I can't tell you exactly what that is.
Great. Well, Frank, thanks. I think that's all the questions, unless I'm missing one of the, oh, here's one more that just popped up. Related to models, is the PredictWind optimal routing allowed during the race, or does it constitute proprietary routing since it's run in the cloud? I can answer that one for you. You're welcome to use PredictWind to get your grid files and to get publicly available weather that we can all access, but you're not allowed to use it for routing. So make sure that the routing file switch is off when you request your information from PredictWind. It is considered outside help under our rules. And there's an FAQ about that as well on our website. So yes, we're expecting that you're going to do all of your routing locally, and you're not allowed to use outside help for any advice that's custom to you or your boat. All right, and I encourage you, go online and look at the FAQs that we have on our website for that. So with that, Frank, thanks so much for that nice overview. When is the next one that you're doing? We're doing one more. Are you planning to do one more of these sessions before the race start? I know you're going to be doing one at the skippers meeting as well.
I don't think we have a date set yet, Andrew.
Okay, well, we'll announce it if we do. Thanks again for prepping this. Charlie, if you're still on, thank you very, very much. And thanks to all our sponsors. For those of you who are watching and are not going to be racing, hopefully you're going to join us at Fort Adams for a really fun event there. And if not, be sure to watch it online. The live stream will be the best one we've ever done. And I'm sure you'll agree once you see it. So with that, we're off until the next webinar. Look forward to seeing everybody else in the starting line.